evidence. I don't think it's in dispute that Mr. Davis was ejected from city council due to disruption. He was asked to leave, he refused to leave, then a series of events unfolded. That's the basis for the criminal charges. The testimony of the mayor and Commissioner Hardesty aren't relevant or material or favorable to Mr. Davis on any of those facts and issues. And then finally, this criminal trial is a result of a disruption that Mr. Davis did with regard to City Hall and city government on January 9th. And this effort to subpoena the entire city council for their emails and have the two available appear here. There is another effort to disrupt the operations of the city, and that's another reason why we would like the court to quash this case.
Okay, it's Mr. Taylor, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Gilbert, let me start by asking you just about the scope of these subpoenas. Are they, I know that they're with respect to the emails that are identified in the subpoenas, but do they go beyond that to requesting the testimony of the people themselves? I wasn't sure about that from the subpoenas.
Just one second. Sure.
This is before this is before my
Okay. So first, yes, I want to make it clear. That these are trial subpoenas for trial testimony.
Okay.
We were also asking for emails. There was a date range, I believe it was 1 month before the incidents, just trying to gather any information leading up to this, because Mr. Davis, this is not the first time he's been to City Hall. I think he has been ejected before.
I've been ejected
multiple times.
No reason.
He's known
And
to City Hall.
Sometimes for actual reasons.
And so all of the witnesses, the commissioners, the mayor, all these people were there that day. All of them are eyewitnesses to what happened. Not only are they eyewitnesses to the event, but presumably they all have a little bit different view of Mr. Davis. Presumably there were discussions about his appearance and how to handle him. But even if there weren't, even if they just remember him from prior incidents and they talk about what happened that day, I think it's highly likely that there will be evidence that we could use to argue for bias. And all this information would have been transmitted or shared with security staff. They would have been aware of the council members' views on Mr. Davis at the time. All of this is relevant to whether he was lawfully ejected, because ultimately that's the issue as far as the defense is concerned. I'm not saying that we're conceding any other issues, but that's probably the primary thrust of our arguments will be is that Mr. Davis was not lawfully ejected. Because, as I'm sure Your Honor knows, to be lawfully ejected, it has to be given a directive to leave the premises. It has to be given by somebody who's in charge. And not only that, it has to comport with the laws of the Constitution, state and federal. If Mr. Davis has an interest in remaining for whatever reason, then that has to be considered, and we will argue that. So anything tending to undermine the motivations of any council members for any information they would have shared with any security people that day or other days about Mr. Davis would be highly relevant to their bias against Mr. Davis, and would be essential information in this case. And one more thing.
Sure.
So,
Where
a newspaper.
in multiple newspapers from the Portland Mercury, the Oregonian, the City Hall disruptors were using
Okay.
their white privilege.
Can I
And
just stop? I got it. I got it. I got it. Okay. Mr. Davis has brought to my attention that as evidence of some of this bias, there were statements made by Commissioner Hardesty that called him out specifically. Was it by name or?
she mentioned City Hall disruptors that were
Yeah.
using their white privilege, and she also named someone who was half black who was using their supposed white privilege. So
And-
this obviously shows a bias.
I believe the half-black person would be Eli Ritchie, and the other guy would be Mr. Davis, which
And Joe Walsh. the older
and Joe
gentleman.
Walsh, another person who was there on January 9th.
A couple of questions for you, Mr. Gilbert.
Yes.
With respect to the emails, and I'll clarify this with Mr. Taylor in just a moment. The emails, I think the city is indicating, any emails that might mention Mr. Davis are agendas. Do you have specific reason to believe that there are emails beyond those, despite what the city is representing, that have to do with Mr. Davis?
No.
And then, Mr. Taylor, let me clarify that with you. Is that the case that the only emails you've done a search of, the only emails you've determined have anything to do with Mr. Davis leading up to this are the agendas?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay, all right. And then, Mr. Gilbert, another question for you. You've seen the witness list for the state, the people they'll be calling. Have you had any conversations with any of the subpoenaed city council people that would suggest to you that they have testimony that would be substantively different than the witnesses who the state intends to call? And the reason I ask is I took one of your points to be that they may have a perspective that's different than the witnesses that the state intends to call.
Yeah, well, okay. Let me just look at the state's witness list.
And while you do that, let me turn to Mr. Zemmel. Mr. Zemmel, do you have any reason to believe that those city council people would have a view of this situation that's any different than the witnesses who had not been subpoenaed? Video surveillance, is that right? Do you intend to play that?
Yes.
Okay, do you have any reason to believe that they have a perspective that's different from those sources?
No, I do not. And to the extent that someone other than G4S might have a perspective, there was dozens of people there that aren't on the city commission who defense also chose not to subpoena but could have.
Okay. All right, Mr. Gilbert.
So, the reason the defense subpoenaed the city council members is because those are the people who make the decisions. Those are the people who made the decisions to eject Mr. Davis. They decide whether he is quote-unquote disruptive. They're the ones who are there, have some familiarity with him, and have clearly must have some feelings one way or the other about him. So those are the people that can most speak to why Mr. Davis was ejected. Anybody who was there can speak to what, happened. Theoretically, they could just say, here's what I saw, here's what I heard. And they would report that testimony through their own, viewpoint, and provide as best they could. But they wouldn't have that background information that only the city council members would have. So I'll just say that we had So, right, for as an example of some of the bias that we expect to elicit through the testimony of the council members. My client tells me that one of the things that he has in video, and I haven't seen this, but I don't have any reason to doubt it. There's a video that it has Commissioner Nick Fish, and this is the day of the incident when he was arrested, and he's motioning over to get the G4S security officers to eject Mr. Davis. And this is all the while Mr. Fish was asking, Mr. Davis was asking Mr. Fish some questions, questions that I would characterize as provocative, and I think that would be, but not necessarily disruptive. That would be evidence of bias. And I think that that's the sort of thing that we can expect to the specifics on that. And I think that's the kind of thing that we can expect through the testimony of the commissioners.
Okay, so from your perspective, Mr. Gilbert, is it one of the commissioners who gave the order to eject Mr. Davis?
Well, I do think that it was, okay. So, hold on. Hold on. Let me finish. From the reports, I think it was the mayor was the one who decided to adjourn the meeting and clear the hall. But there was also this incident when Nick Fish called over G4S security, indicating he wanted them to eject Mr. Davis.
Okay, so it's your position that Commissioner Fish gave the order to eject?
Well, but I wouldn't say that it was hit. I cannot. You need to stop.
I'm trying to clarify the record so you can get.
Well, Mr. Davis, it's clear, it should be clear to you at this point that you're not clarifying, you're derailing your attorney, and it's making things less clear, so.
Well, it should be pretty obvious because it's not that hard to.
Let's let Mr. Gilbert make his argument on your behalf.
From the reports in this case, I think it was Dorothy Elmore who decided to make the order, or Dorothy Elmore and is it Cheryl Guerrero together. But there's also indications that other people involved were making the decision, and that the mayor, like I said, the mayor had a part in the decision to clear the chambers, and as did Nick Fish. You know, clearly wanted to have Mr. Davis ejected.
And I'll note for the record, just because the record might not reflect this otherwise, that Ms. Guerrero and Ms. Elmore are on the state's witness list. Let me turn to Mr. Taylor really quickly. Do you have any decisions? I'm sorry.
If you keep talking, just saying it, like the microphones are, you can't talk while he's speaking.
Oh,
and you're speaking, like it's starting.
I was whispering. But
Yeah, I didn't think about that, and the reason for that, Mr. Davis, is it's not necessarily something that you're whispering that disrupts us, but the microphone right there is the microphone that we use to make the record, and so if it's too loud while somebody else is talking, the record's not going to reflect what they're saying if the case goes up on appeal. So that's the reason for that. So, Mr. Taylor, do you have any reason to believe that it was one of the city council that gave the order to eject Mr. Davis?
Your Honor, I believe that I conferred with Mr. Zemmel, and I believe that he's relying on the order from Ms. Guerrero from G4S, that she's a duly authorized person in charge under the city code. So that would be the basis and evidence at trial for the ejection.
I understand. Mr. Zemmel, is that correct?
Yes, and I apologize, the reason I'm sitting back there.
No, I appreciate it.
Okay, I would, if any of these issues do go through, I would address them as like an issue of relevance and within the Oregon Evidence Code, but it's the state's position that Ms. Lynn Guerrero and as well as Ms. Elmore were the ones who were in a position of authority. The commissioners were there, it was a city hall meeting. There will be testimony about a light on Mr. Davis's camera that has been bothering one of the commissioners over a period of time, and that was initially the trigger for security contacting Mr. Davis. But as far as the words spoken